Welcome to episode 9 of the Everyday Sens podcast. I'm Jack Richardson alongside Brennan Parks. And Brennan, I got to come up with something new to say when we start these things off. But once again, it's ownership news. And honestly, the ownership news is turning into Neko Sparks news. And obviously, in episode 8, we touched on Donovan Bailey joining the fold. Russell Peters is now on board, who is a comedian from the GTA. Just I think I woke up. I think it was Saturday morning, so it was after we had released episode 8, and I woke up and I know we touched on it about the ridiculousness, I guess we'll call it, of all these celebrities joining in. And I say ridiculousness meaning like not that I think it's bad. It's just it's very weird that so many are joining in and the social media posts and everything. So I woke up and saw that and it was just I don't know. I think I'm at my wit's end a little bit with that. So we will talk a little bit more about that. But how's it going today? It is on this Monday, May 22nd. We're kind of cooking along here throughout May.
It's going good. Yeah, I know. Finally, here we're in the final week of the ownership process. They said this will be the week Bruce Garriock in the coming days will know who the new owner of the Ottawa Senators is. So that's super exciting. Like you said, yeah, this Neko Sparks thing, it's especially weird because they're considered to be the one group who might not even be like in it anymore. I mean, that's the speculation is there's 3 serious bids and it sounds like the Neko Sparks one might be on the outside of it. So it feels weird. It feels like some sort of a play they're doing where it's like maybe they're trying to set up their interest for a different franchise in the States or something. I don't know. Yeah, we can dive into the latest bit of news on that because it's kind of funny and a bit different than the ones we've been talking about. But regardless, yeah, like this is an exciting week. This could be the biggest week, from a certain standpoint for the Sens in a long time, maybe even in franchise history, right? It sets them up for the future and for everything to come. So yeah, it's time to get excited, Sens fans.
It's a big week, yeah, and hopefully by episode 10, maybe we'll have some kind of news on who's at least left or who's out, I guess, from these 4 groups. But yeah, so we'll get into a little bit of Donovan Bailey. We touched on him again last episode and just what it means and what he could bring, blah blah blah. But Bailey is a Leafs fan, grew up, I guess, a Leafs fan, and was on CBC radio over the weekend and spoke, I guess, about his favorite Sens player or whatever. And we got an all timer in Mike Spezza. Obviously, he's misspeaking, and he meant Jason Spezza, but combined maybe with Mike Fisher there. I don't know. What were your thoughts when you heard that? Because I don't want to like. I bet you if you go through all these ownership groups, like they're probably gonna mess up some of the players. They're not all super fans like we are, but this just seemed like a little bit of a cherry on top to a very weird situation already.
It's just weird because he agreed to go on to CBC and do the interview, but it's almost like he didn't prep it all. And I know some people were actually outraged on Twitter, and I get it. Like, I mean, he pretty much couldn't name a Sen that's on the team right now or in the past, really, like by saying Mike Spezza. And yeah, it's a misspeak, but at the same time, is it just like him messing up the name, or is it him actually not knowing and trying to wing it a little bit, which it's just concerning. It's weird because this is a group who wants to buy the team, wants to buy the Ottawa Senators, but with every passing day, it kind of seems like they're not able, like, I don't know, the group just seems like they're not interested in the Sens. They're interested in a franchise, like a sports franchise. So it doesn't look good for the Neko Sparks bid. That's all I can say, just based on what we're hearing. I know they might think that the publicity thing is the way to go, and it certainly has its, positive impacts, and it would be cool to see so many celebrities involved, but when you can't name a member of the Sens, that's not going to sit well in the small market community here in Ottawa. So people have the right to be kind of upset by that. And if the group wins, I'm sure we're going to hear about it a lot more.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned it before we started recording, but as I mentioned, he's a Leafs fan and I guess had said it himself. But you'd think, especially this weekend after everything that happened, even if you're just a casual fan, you would have seen Jason Spezza's name out there. And obviously, we don't want to like dive too much into a mispronunciation or he misnamed his first name. Like that doesn't matter to me that much, but it's just kind of interesting. Like with the news that Jason Spezza is also leaving the Leafs front office, we can kind of spin this into the potential of him joining the Ottawa Senators, because if it was, I remember with him towards the end of his playing career, it was Leafs or retirement. So I imagine now that he's out of the Leafs and he's not going to be working with them anymore in the foreseeable future, I'd imagine the Sens are pretty high up there for him if he wants to step into this role. So we talked about Alfredson a lot. We talked about president of hockey ops, and we've talked about their pro scouting side. Like I believe he was the special assistant to the GM, and I think it was his title in Toronto. So would you like to see him do something like that with Pierre Dorion? I don't know if that would be a strange kind of overlap because the two never really worked together. I think Pierre was a scout or maybe assistant GM by the time Spezza had left, but a little bit interesting coming up to this season. I wouldn't be surprised to see him take a year off, but would you like to bring number 19 back into the fold?
Yeah, it's really interesting because there are some bitter feelings with Spezza for the way he left and whatever else happened. I mean, I don't really have any bitter feelings towards him. I'm not too opposed to the idea. I think, like, from what we've heard, he did a pretty good job in Toronto with the special assistant to Kyle Dubas. Like, he actually had a pretty positive influence on the team. So, this comes back to Dubas too, where the rumor now, Luke Fox from Sportsnet reported that a source told him, and I quote, I think Kyle's waiting, like Kyle Dubas is waiting for Ottawa. That's what they said, and there's been a lot of ties there. I think the Spezza thing really relates to Kyle Dubas in the sense that if Dubas came to Ottawa, I think he'd be the first one to say, let's bring Jason Spezza in here too. And that could be, that doesn't mean Dorion's replaced. Dubas could come in as a front office role or an executive or a president of hockey operations, bring Spezza in into a front office role, bring Alfredson in. Like, we could just have the whole gang coming on in here with new ownership. And I mean, there's positive and negatives to it all. We've already talked about the Dubas thing, so I don't want to dive too much into that, but like this is a real rumor now where it could actually happen and a real source of speculation. People, like you said, when we talked about Dubas, they have their Toronto goggles on a little bit because anybody who comes from Toronto now, and DJ Smith was kind of the cherry on top, anybody that comes from Toronto now, people just automatically do not want. Doesn't matter what their track record is, they just don't like them. It's Toronto and that's all they see. And I respect it. That's fine. We all don't like Toronto, but I don't know. I look past that a little bit and I kind of see what they actually bring and the intangibles they bring to the table. And I mean, I see some really positive things from both Dubas and Spezza. So I'd be interested in it. And they need to expand that front office group like we talked about last time. So if it's Spezza, if it's Alfredson, if it's both, if it's Dubas, if it's Dorion, like get as many people in here as we can. I want to see the owners spending right away.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that too because I think Dubas waiting for Ottawa. It's okay. What does that mean? Does it mean he's waiting exactly for new ownership? And it could, but I think a report maybe it was over the weekend. It might have actually happened on Friday, and I think it was from Bruce that said alluded to anyway that paperwork for ownership won't be complete until like the fall or like August or something. So that's a whole other thing with LeBreton because I know that the fall 2023 is a deadline for LeBreton, so that's interesting. But if Dubas is waiting, and obviously in his year-end press conference, the infamous one now last week, he said that he won't be popping up anywhere if it's not in Toronto. And you can believe that or not, but the report or the source saying that he's going to wait for Ottawa kind of matches that timeline, doesn't it? Because if you're new owners, you can't really fire a GM in August. It doesn't make any sense because you've already started to prep for the next season and the draft and free agency. Everything's already happened. So I know you were tweeting about it, but based on that report, it kind of seems like Pierre and DJ will be back for at least the start of the next season, and I think we should start wrapping our heads around that. And that's fine, but it I guess in the future, the summer 2024, it kind of is lining up pretty well, right? Like if we want Dubas and he's still out there next summer, that's good. I think you and I are both on the same page on that regard. Like he would be a good piece and a good upgrade for them. So just because he's not in the fold now doesn't mean that he won't be next summer, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So it's interesting how that kind of timeline is working out. So I think that's what it means. Dubas is waiting for Ottawa. And obviously it kind of ties into Mike Spezza because obviously he's going to probably follow him, I would imagine. Like they seemed like they had a good relationship. And Dubas obviously grew up as a Sens fan and Spezza is one of the best Senators of all time. Definitely the most polarizing Senators of all time. I think it was interesting what you mentioned there about some maybe not ill will, but like it wasn't a very happy ending for Spezza. Like he was captain for one season. It wasn't a great year. I remember, I mean, again, like I mentioned with Alfie, we were kind of maybe we missed the prime, like Jason Spezza years, but looking back at some of those articles about when he was trying to break in on that team with Jacques Martin and like the public comments he made, like the coach doesn't like me or something like that. Like, I don't know. I'm obviously paraphrasing, but it was a rocky ride for Jason Spezza in Ottawa. But at the end of the day, he's a franchise legend and a part of one of the best lines of all time in the NHL. So obviously it'd be great to have him back in the nation's capital.
It's just like Heatley too, right? Danny Heatley. People are very sour with how things ended with Heatley, but I'm kind of here like bring him back in, like get Heatley back in the alumni games. I want to see him back. I feel no ill will towards any of them. Um, yeah, the Dubas Spezza thing. I didn't read too much into why Spezza left necessarily, but I know, like I think there was ties to the fact that Dubas was fired or didn't get a contract renewal, and that's kind of why Spezza left too, is because he was close with Dubas and felt he should have been back. That's kind of what I'm assuming, anyways. Um, yeah, I don't know. Like the waiting on Ottawa thing is interesting because you see it as maybe next summer, maybe they let go of Dorion, but and that could very well be it. But I'm wondering too, like I do wonder if he would take a different role that isn't just directly GM, like because with new ownership, it just feels like you might not be able to shake things up right away just because of the timelines, but the timeline for like expanding that front office feels perfect for Dubas. Because I mean, Dubas, if he has aspirations of, and I know he said he wants to spend a lot more time with his family too, but like it's not a far drive to Ottawa from Toronto. Like it's a pretty close thing. It's not like a whole uprooting, right, necessarily. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like the timeline is perfect if he wants to maybe take something that isn't just GM. Like I'm talking about president of hockey ops a lot because I feel like they need to get somebody in there, and that's a role that's just been missing, and it's critical to the operations. Like you have to fill that ASAP. And they need to do that this summer. I think before the season or whenever they take over, it's got to be a priority. Like I'd make it almost a number one priority is get somebody in there. I think Dubas is a prime candidate for it. And I know Leaf or people that don't like the Leafs, they're going to argue it because they didn't win there and stuff. But I think he is a prime candidate. And yeah, I mean, I'd like him to be the GM, but I said I'm on the Kyle Dubas train. Whether it's GM, president of hockey ops, something else, bring him in, get Spezza, start interviewing, like get this stuff going because they need to expand that group. And you know, I'm all aboard the Dubas train.
Yeah, and just before we kind of move on from Spezza and all that discussion, and obviously it ties back into Donovan Bailey with the group, and I just think it's interesting kind of that we might have to wrap our heads around the same kind of regime that we both kind of blasted last week, coming back for the Sens, and we're obviously going to talk about it all summer, but it's gonna I think contextualize our I guess expectations, if that makes sense. Like it'll put some like I guess I'm trying to put in the words. So what's the if they don't make the playoffs, if they're not in the hunt, or if it's blah blah blah, when do you fire them? And I'm thinking next summer if this team misses the playoffs and we're both saying that they need to make it, like are you taking a sledgehammer to the roster? Like what's going to happen? Because it's very possible that new owners come in, put their management people in throughout the season, get a new coach, and this team just misses. And now you're in the summer of 2024. You've been 7 years out of the playoffs. What do you do? I think that'll be a different discussion. It obviously depends who's in the front office, but that being said, I think I don't know. I feel like that Garriock article, Bruce's allusion to the fact that it might take longer than we're all hoping, kind of made me like the wheels are starting to spin here. Like I'm kind of trying to picture what this team's going to look like and what the expectations are around the group going into next year.
Yeah, and we're kind of getting into it now, but our next segment here, I've actually got something that'll tie in very well to this, so we should probably jump into that. I don't want to get into it too much because then I'm going to be missing out on one of my hits. So yeah, if you want to get into the next segment there, and then we can break it down even more.
Perfect. All right. So our next segment and kind of just the rest of this episode is going to be winners and losers from the 2021 or 2022 2023 NHL season. So this last calendar year, let's say. And we're going to do two for each. We're going to try, and they don't have to necessarily be limited to players. We can do fans, management, coaching, scouts if we wanted, like anything like that. So obviously it's going to be a loose definition of winning and losing. But you know, for me personally, I don't know about you, but for me, I'm going to kind of go off of expectations, exceeding, didn't exceed, blah blah blah. So how do you want to go winners first and then losers?
Yeah, we can do our winners first, or
Sure.
we can
Right,
go
so
back and forth.
hit me with your two winners here, Brennan.
We'll do one at a time. Like I'll do mine and then
Okay.
you do yours.
Good call.
Okay, so for the first one, I'll just because we were just talking about it, I'm gonna build on it. My first winners are Pierre Dorion and DJ Smith. And that's not because they're winners as in like they did a good job necessarily this season. It's that the way things played out makes them a winner because both of them are almost definitely going to have a job next year. Like I think that if ownership had concluded when it was supposed to, which was before July 1st, that's when the league set their expectation. They wanted everything wrapped up with this sale before July 1st. Now, with the owners, like they might be announced this week, but they don't actually take over and do things until the paperwork is all settled. Bruce Garriock reported that that won't be settled till late August or early fall, and that the owners have all accepted that they're not going to be able to impact the draft or free agency this year, which is honestly brutal because like that's like a whole offseason just missed for the new owners. Like they're going in the next year now with basically what they've got. You can't replace the GM and coach late August. Like we're talking about training camp in September, early September. You can't just replace everything and blow it all up in late August or early fall. That's just unrealistic. They're going to have to stick with what they've got. So a winner for me is Pierre Dorion and DJ Smith because as much as we might not like it, they just got free job security for the next little while at least, and they know that they're going to make it through the summer now because the odds of a new owner coming in and blowing it up are next to none. I think that we just have to accept this is going to be another year of the same thing, and then they're going to go from there.
That's a good one, yeah. Because honestly, they obviously they didn't plan on this happening, but you're right. I mean, I think the extra job security, and you could even extend that to the last 5 years, both of them or 4 years. The security that they've both had has been pretty unprecedented, and that's been pretty well documented. So I like those. I like that pick. My first one's gonna kind of just I'm gonna keep it simple for this one. I'm just gonna do on the ice. Kind of looked at a player who I was excited about, and I think just blew every expectation out of the water. Was even better than I thought. I'm going with Claude Giroux, the old man on the team. I think the Sens right now it wrapped up the other day, but their Twitter account was kind of posting like goals of the year, and it was like a vote. And I know that the final four, Giroux had three of the final four like highlight reel goals from the season, and he had more in there too. But I think they were pitted against each other in the bracket. Like this guy, I think set he set a career high in goals, or and I just think that he's such a gamer, and I really do think that the intangibles that he brings off the ice, and people always roll their eyes at intangibles, but this Sens team is built on intangibles, right? Like drafting Brady Tkachuk, but it's kind of interesting. Like I think Tkachuk said it himself, his leadership has taken another step because of Claude Giroux, and that's really cool to me. Like I think that signing could go down as like the best in. I said it at the time, and I said it in November. I think I wrote about it. The best signing in franchise history, hands down. And I think we're just going to keep seeing the fruits of it. I was absolutely blown away with Claude Giroux this year. I don't think he had a bad game. Like just offensively, the fact that he's putting up numbers like that on the second power play unit too. Never saw any time on that top unit really if everyone was healthy. Put his head down, went to work, and it seems like maybe not even Brady Tkachuk because he is what he is, and he drags people into the fight. I think Claude Giroux is very responsible for Tim Stützle stepping into his own as well, and I think he deserves a lot of credit. So Claude Giroux to me is a big winner this season, and maybe it's not even him himself; it's more Sens fans because of Claude Giroux. Like, how lucky are we that this guy's on the team? We can just know what we're gonna get with him night in and night out.
Giroux is just the perfect acquisition. It looked perfect on paper, and then you kind of thought, okay, like I tried to temper expectations. Like I kind of tried to say, okay, Giroux, he's probably gonna come in and be a good leader, but let's be real, he's turning 35 years old. He's probably gonna have kind of a he's been kind of regressing in Philly over the last few years, points wise and stuff. And then he comes into Ottawa and he just lights it up. A career high in goals, 35 years old. Like he scored 35 goals and he put up the most points, 79 in 5 years. Like what 35-year-old does that? That's just absurd. So I think just his fit on the ice was like it really, really improved Ottawa's offense. I mean, anybody that played with Giroux saw increases in like everything, points, metrics, all of it. Like he just made everyone better. And I just couldn't believe how good of a fit he was. But off the ice, like how we basically called him another coach. We considered him another coach because you saw clips of him on the bench, like directing not even just the players, but the coaches. He was like yelling at the coaches as if he was part of that group. So this is a guy who, when he retires, he's going to be on the bench of a certain team because his leadership abilities and like he understands the game at another level, man. Like the intelligence that he put on the players around him is just totally surreal. So that's an awesome pick. Giroux is he's like the ultimate Sen, and I mean he's our John Tavares where he put on the pajamas and he comes home, right? So absolutely love that one. My next one I'm going to dive into, and it kind of follows the same idea where this player didn't. And this is a player, it didn't really succeed on the ice this year. Like he's not a winner because of his performance. He's a winner because of what happened around the team. So my second one is Thomas Chabot. Now, we really criticized Shabbat this year, and I was very harsh about his play because he made a lot of mistakes and he just regressed. Like, he was not the same dynamic player that we'd seen in years past. The reason that I say he's a winner is because he's no longer the only defenseman on that decor. Like, he's now got Jake Sanderson coming in behind him, right? He's got Jacob Chikrin now. So Shabbat spent the most time partnered with Nikita Zaitsev over the last 5 years. Like, he's been with Zaitsev way more than anybody else. And then he also spent a lot of time with Hainsey when Hainsey was here. It's just, he's been partnered with these guys who aren't overly effective and who have kind of been anchoring him down. But it's the ice time. That's the big thing with Shabbat. And I said this is I was critical of Shabbat, but I think his usage was a huge problem. He averaged almost 25 minutes this year, which was ninth in the league. And that's like ninth is way lower than he's been previously. I think in each of the last 4 years, he was top 3 in average ice time, which is just, imagine playing that much, like year after year playing, and especially when you're doing it with Nikita Zaitsev, right? And Sanderson came in and he averaged 25-18 over the final 16 games. And I think that's a testament to DJ Smith trusting him more in Shabbat's absence when he was hurt. So I think next year Sanderson's going to be playing heavy minutes from the get-go. I think they're going to be splitting minutes. Like, he and Shabbat are going to be splitting minutes. It's not going to be Shabbat playing 26 minutes a night anymore. I mean, he averaged 26 minutes or more in each of the last 3 years, Shabbat, other than this one, which is just, it's unrealistic to think a player is going to be sustaining their dynamic performance like Shabbat was a few years ago when they're playing that much. It's just, you're pushing him to his limits into the ground every night, and it's almost unfair. Like, I feel bad for Shabbat for the way they've used him. But yeah, now they've got Sanderson there. They've also got Chikrin, who Chikrin averaged 21-23 over the last 10 games this year. He's another guy who can take minutes from Shabbat or partner with him and at least take some of that load off of him. Shabbat, he had a bad year, but like, we're going to probably get into this later in the summer, but he's one of my biggest bounce back candidates next year because I think playing less minutes especially is going to be the catalyst behind his better performance. And it doesn't seem like those things correlate because he's going to be on the ice less, but he's going to be fresh. Like, he's going to have a new attitude and a new kind of, he's not going to be fatigued all the time. He's going to actually be able to skate down the ice without breathing heavy, which is something new for Shabbat. And he's done this his whole career. He's just been worked into the ground, and now he's in his prime. And I think next year he's going to be 10 times better than he was this year.
I like that one because I was kind of debating my second one, and I'm not going to go with it, but I'll just kind of mention it. Jack Capuano was my winner mention because he's the D coach for the Sens, and look at the weapons they have now, right? Like the Sens decor is going to be a strength next season, and probably the best part about their team, which is saying something. So I was going to put him, and I think Shabbat goes in hand with that, right? You're completely bang on with that. Before last season, anticipating Sanderson was going to come in and just be impactful, I wrote that Shabbat needed to have a statement year, and quite honestly, I might just take that article and say the same thing this season because he does again. Like, he needs to. He is quite honestly now for me at this very moment. He's third on the depth chart for D. Like, I've got Sanderson and Chikrin ahead of him.
Based
But he
on
can
last
easily
season, that's fair. That's totally fair.
exactly yeah. So like going into next year, that's how it should kind of play out. But like they should all be equally dispersed ice time wise, give or take. But yeah, I like that pick a lot. So my second one, I'm not going to go with Jack Capuano. I'm going to go with way off the ice. I'm going to go with the Melnick daughters and the Melnick estate. I think you look at the last calendar year. Obviously, losing their father is brutal, and it's not something that anyone at their age or at our age, we're all the same age as them, should go through. It's not an enviable position. But that being said, like, look what's happened with this team over the last 10 months, 12 months, has been very impressive. So I think that they're a big part of the progressiveness that the Sens have shown. I think the Pride Night in Ottawa was really special this season. The Indigenous Rights Night, like, they've had a lot more inclusiveness. It sounds like just that's a small part of it, and I would imagine that it's them leading that. Um, but also, like, they've got a bidding war for $1 billion going on for this thing that they own. So how could you not say they're winners? They're going to be rich, and obviously in that situation, they're going to be okay anyway, even if they held on to the team. Like, they'd have a pretty well off life, but it's like they're going to be set for life. And it sounds like they're going to keep a stake in the team, which will probably drive the price down a little bit. But at the same time, like, they're going to have a piece of the team. They don't have to be making the decisions. They're not the main owners, and they've got nearly $1 billion in the bank between the two of them. So I think just all in all, the way the team was invested and improved on the ice, the experience of the Canadian Tire Center was way better this season. Sellouts, like 10 sellouts, I think this season, full crowds, most nights like 90% capacity average, I think all season. I think that's just a win for them, and it's they might say that this was always part of the plan, this was always the timeline, but we'll never know that, and I don't believe it. I believe that Eugene Melnyk passing away had a lot to do with why the last 12 months happened and why the sale is happening when it is. But I think they're just you can't not say that they're not winners right now because look, they're going to be in their early 20s with $1 billion.
Yeah, and like if you see their Instagram stories too, it's not like they're sitting there at the Canadian Tire Center like processing the bids. No, they're off enjoying every single event that they can be enjoying. I mean, they're just having a good time, and they deserve it. Like you said, it's brutal to go through something like that at this age. It's just you don't wish that on anyone, and regardless of how the team's done better, it's a very tragic thing, to ever see that. So, that is a really good one though. I actually didn't even think of that. Like I was going through everybody in the organization, and that didn't even come to mind. But yeah, they're living their best life, and they're gonna be just rolling in money after this whole thing is done. So, congratulations to them. Plus, they get to own probably 10% of the team too. Like they're keeping that stake, keeping their name in the around the team. So, yeah, congrats to them. I guess we'll get into losers now, though. I can do my first one. So my first one is Cam Talbot. Now, Talbot was acquired last year in exchange for Philip Gustafson. It was just 1-for-1, and myself included. Like people were fine with the deal at the time because we liked Gustafson, just the consensus Sens fans. We like Gustafson. He showed potential, but he wasn't putting it all together in Ottawa. Like he didn't look like he was ready for the full-time role, and they needed to be better this year. There were firm expectations that the Sens had to be better this year. So Dorion went out and he got a goaltender who was an all-star last year, and he traded someone who just wasn't working in Ottawa. We were fine at the time, but Talbot, while he played 36 games, he posted an 898 save percentage, which was his lowest in 5 years. And he couldn't stay healthy. Like he had 3 separate injuries this year, which for a goalie, that's just it's hard to get into a rhythm when you're dealing with injuries. But Talbot, when he was playing, super inconsistent. He was in some of those games, and he actually had a positive win record. Like he had a winning record, but I don't know. I mean, the team really, he let in a lot of bad goals. I thought in a lot of critical moments, and just wasn't able to play. He was almost like Matt Murray, where he just wasn't able to play when they needed him to play. And down the stretch, when they had the opportunity to make the playoffs, Talbot wasn't available. He was hurt. And that's not necessarily on him, but I'd say he's a loser for this season just because it really hurt the team. If Talbot was healthy all year, maybe they make the playoffs, right? I mean, I don't know, but the goalie situation really kind of screwed the team over, and for that reason, I say Talbot is a loser, and also the fact that Gustafson went and he had a Vezina caliber season in Minnesota. So now fans are just against Talbot at this point. I mean, you like the guy off the ice, but Gustafson, that's bitter, man. Like you look and you look at if Gustafson could have done half of what he did in Minnesota this year, which who knows, right? I mean, he said he found his game behind a more confident situation there in Minnesota, but if he could have done half of that for Ottawa and stayed healthy, maybe they made the playoffs too. So Talbot, we respect you for coming in, but it did not work out as everybody had hoped.
Yeah, that's a good one, and anything to do with that Philip Gustafson for Talbot deal is a loss. I'm gonna go with a guy who is still part of the core, and maybe not even necessarily his fault. So it's kind of a 1-2. My first loser of this season is going to be Josh Norris and the Ottawa Senators medical team. At the time when he got re-injured and was done for the year, I think it was against Winnipeg. I was hot. I was very angry. Um, and I respect that the Sens the approach they took was it's in the player's hands. It's his decision, like not to to rehab and not do surgery in October, blah blah blah. And honestly, not even if he had the surgery in October, it's not like he would be back for a playoff run in March kind of thing, right? He still probably would have been out until playoffs, maybe if they were lucky. But anyway, I just think that whole thing, um, it didn't sit right with me, and it still doesn't really. It's bothering. It bothers me that shoulders with this strength and conditioning team. Like it's not a people might be rolling their eyes and it's like, oh, injuries are flukes. Like, I don't know. I'm looking at the Panthers and Hurricanes after that 4 overtime game, and I don't know if you saw, but Matthew Kachuk is, he's the player of the game, obviously, because he gets the winner, and he shouts out the strength and conditioning team because he's like, these were the best conditioned teams in the league. I think the Carolina Hurricanes like are known for that because Rod Brind'Amour is their coach. Like there's so much that goes into it, and you might kind of think, oh, every NHL team just copy paste with the way they train and the dieting and all this, but they're not. It's completely different. It's subjective, and it's up to your strength and conditioning and your athletic therapy, blah blah blah. So it's not a coincidence, or maybe it is. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but the shoulder injuries are kind of like a red flag, huge red flag to me. And I know that the Sens especially kind of, you know, praise their, and former players always praise the staff and how nice they are and they're great people, and I'm not discounting any of that. But it's not a good look. Basically, is what I'm saying. Especially a $60 million investment like Josh Norris, like that, just essentially wasting a full season of his career. So it's not really putting blame on anyone, but that whole situation was just a loss, and they needed Norris, and I don't think that it was fair to either him or the team to kind of throw him back in that situation and then just have him get injured again. Like it's not a good look. And again, of course, it happened the year before with Shane Pinto, another young center and another shoulder, injuring it on a face-off. So I don't know. Maybe they got to analyze something like that. I'm not a genius when it comes to athletic therapy, but it's not a coincidence that it keeps happening.
Yeah, and I'm gonna have to pivot now because Josh Norris was my second loser as well. Um, no, but yeah, so he got injured after 5 games this year, and it was like one of those fluke incidents where it was off the face-off. I think, yeah, like you said, it was just like a weird thing where he kind of got his shoulder tied up, and it didn't look bad, and then it ended up holding him out for 4 months. And then he came back after 4 months, and the vibes were good. Like, the vibes were good because the Sens were primed to make a playoff push, and they were getting Josh Norris back. And again, depth was one of their biggest issues this year, largely because Pinto had to play the second line instead of the third line, and then Gambrell had to play the third line for a lot of the year, and it just, depth was not good enough, mainly because of injuries. So Norris came back after 4 months, and suddenly things look good. The top six looked good, the depth looked good, it all looked like it was coming together. 3 games later, like, couldn't even get, a 5-game stint. 3 games later, he re-injures that shoulder, and he doesn't come back. And it's just devastating because he signed that, deal for $8 million a year, and he's coming off of a 35 goal, I've got it pulled up here, 35 goal, 55 point second season in the league, sophomore season. And like, you have to think with the steps this core took this year, I mean, Norris could have very well put up 40 plus goals over a full season and potentially, 80 plus points along with Kachuk and Timmy, right? So like that's a really, I'm sure he's more devastated than anybody about it because he's a competitor. Nobody wants to sit on the sidelines hurt. But yeah, like his loss, and we talked about it last time, how centers are so important to a team's operations, and being deep at center is critical. Ottawa wasn't, and it was because they were missing Josh Norris. So yeah, that was arguably their biggest loss this year, aside from the goaltenders, and maybe even more than the goaltenders.
Yeah, and just another quick thing on Norris, because we actually haven't really talked much about him. I think we could dedicate a couple of episodes to a player, throughout the summer. But with Norris, it's like he came back, and I'm still hot thinking about it. I remember at the time I was writing like crazy, and just like it was a crazy situation. But he comes back, and it was what, mid-January. I know it was that brutal loss to the Jets where he re-injured it. And if I'm remembering the play correctly, it's kind of, he was reaching for a puck in the neutral zone and just kind of got bumped. Like he wasn't hit, he just ran into a guy kind of, and you can see him go back to the bench. He's like, "Yeah, I'm done," and then he was shut down for the year, had surgery. I guess I'm just thinking like, and maybe this is me blaming him a little bit. Like, what was the plan? Because if I'm watching these teams in the playoffs, and it is a hard game, and like everything, every hit is finished. You have to finish every hit. Like face-offs are a grind. Like in front of the net, it's a scrum every time. So even if he had played the rest of the season, was he expecting to not get bumped like that again? Like I don't know if you can call that a fluke. It's just like you got to understand that if you're that fragile, then you aren't ready to play. And I think that it would have. I mean, he was already out all year, so it doesn't re-hurt the team. But like, you got our hopes up, Like you said, we were fired up. They were going on a playoff run. I just don't. I was frustrated about the whole thing because it's like, what do you expect to happen when you go into a playoff battle against Brent Burns because you were going to play the Carolina Hurricanes? Like he's going to make your life miserable. There's no way he would have made it through that many more games. That's what's frustrating to me.
Well, they must have just overestimated where his shoulder was at, right? Like, I don't know. I'm hoping they wouldn't just throw him back out there if, he really wasn't ready to go. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and the problem is, like, I know Norris. at least last season for sure, finished first in the fitness testing. Like he's the
True,
best. He's
yeah.
in the best shape on the team. But again, that goes back to me being like he's in the best shape because these guys, the strength coaches, give them programs to work on through the off season.
Yeah.
So they're telling him to do, oh yeah, don't loosen up your shoulder. I don't know, like uh, I've had friends who played hockey at super high levels and their shoulders are all messed up and stuff like that, and like surgery is required pretty much, and it's just I don't understand like the decision making from him because I know it's obviously his choice, and I don't want to you know get mad at him for not having surgery originally, but it just leaves more questions, and he is a question mark going into the next season. We don't know how he's going to be. It's a big change. So that's kind of my Josh Norris rant there, but he is definitely one of the losers for me this season.
Yeah, and you just feel bad for him. Like even I mean, you know, even if like it was a bad choice, like if it was him saying he felt like his shoulder was good enough to go, he just wanted to help make a playoff run, right? And it's unfortunate. Like you have to think if he was that fragile, he would have known that he was that fragile or like that it was a big risk coming back. Because if I'm remembering right, he didn't need to have surgery originally, correct? And then when he decided to come back, he ended up having to have it, which is a bigger deal because there's greater risk now of re-injuring it again and again and again. And if we're paying $8 million a year for a guy who's going to be hurt all the time, that's a huge loss. Like Norris is a critical part of the team. I think he's one of the most underrated critical components of the roster, just because people forget about him a lot of the time because he's been hurt. But it's like, man, like you need to have that guy in your top six. He's a big part at center. So we'll move off of Norris and maybe talk about him later in a separate episode a little bit. But my second loser, so I have it written down as Josh Norris, but I'm going to just pivot here. I'm going to go, and we've talked about it a little bit, but it's the first thing I can think of. I'm going to say Ryan Reynolds and the NHL. And I say this because Ryan Reynolds was going to be the perfect owner of the Ottawa Senators. He was the A++ pick. He was the guy who was going to promote things for the league. He was going to do a whole documentary and kind of do this unique ownership style that we haven't really seen before in the NHL, where he was going to be involved, but he was going to have partners who had deep pockets, who were going to help the Sens be a Stanley Cup champion. But he was going to kind of do this thing that we hadn't seen from NHL owners that we're seeing in Wrexham. And it was going to be huge for the game of hockey. Like, not just the Sens, but for the game of hockey, it was going to be massive. And this is why Gary Bettman could not keep the smile off his face when he was asked about it, is because it was going to bring a ton of revenue, and globally, it was going to bring a lot of people to the NHL and to the game of hockey like it has for Wrexham. So it's hard to blame the NHL because the whole thing that happened with the timeline and the window was not the NHL's fault. It was really on Reynolds and the Remington Group, and it's a whole thing. But I think overall, regardless of what happened, the fact that Reynolds is out and the fact that the NHL's not going to get him as an owner unless something happens at the last second here, I think that's a huge loss for everybody involved. Like, it's a loss for the Sens, it's a loss for Reynolds, it's a loss for the NHL, it's a loss for the game of hockey, it's a loss for the fans of hockey. It just sucks. Like, it really sucks, and I'm still upset about it, even though we're gonna get a new owner here. It's still in the back of my mind, just kind of eating away at me.
It's going to be a big what could have been kind of scenario. And again, this is assuming he's not going to join another group, and I'm not. We said it before. I'm not really holding out hope on that. I've kind of closed the chapter, but it is disappointing because it would have been so good for the Sens as a brand and for the NHL, for a league that's kind of struggling to make a name in the U.S. especially. It would have been huge. So on that, actually, my loser kind of ties into that a little bit. It is on the ice. I'm going to go with Alex DeBrincat because you think about just this whole situation contract wise and waiting for ownership is kind of what it sounds like he's doing, maybe, and maybe he doesn't even know if he wants to stay here yet. But the season he had, the fact that we were kind of sitting here going into last season, being curious about the impact he would make, right? And obviously, the qualifying offer number was in everyone's mind, and that was one of the first things brought up with the trade. Uh, you're thinking, is this a $9 million man? And I think all season it was a debate, and it still is. Like, is he worth $9 million? I think with the season DeBrincat had, he didn't do himself any favors, right? And he didn't make it worse, but he didn't make it any better. I think he kind of stayed stagnant. He was a 27 goal scorer with 66 points, I think. Set a career high in assists. Was not good at 5-on-5. Couldn't score really on 5-on-5. Didn't get help defensively. Like, a lot of numbers that I would not be surprised if they flip the other way in his favor next season, and then we're all just kind of laughing about this. But the way his season went and the way it started, he started really slow. I don't think he did himself any favors. And then on top of all that, the way this ownership thing is dragging out, I don't know if that's another factor. If we're not signing papers and they can't do anything until August, that'll be past an arbitration date. He'll have a new deal by then, regardless of where it is. So I think in general he's just losing right now because he moves to a new city and the team is expected to do great things. Internally, they're saying we achieved our goals, blah, blah, blah. You listen to any players. That's actually another thing I wanted to mention about Claude Giroux. Whenever he does post-game, pre-game media, I'm immediately watching him. There's a couple players where I'm like, I don't need to listen to that. Like nothing's gonna come out there. But Giroux is always so raw and honest, and I like it. Which is why, again, it kind of ties into the DeBrincat thing. The Sens say they met expectations this season, but you listen to the players and especially Giroux, it kind of sounds like they had playoff expectations in that dressing room, and they didn't meet them. And I think that I've made the argument that if DeBrincat could have potted 3 or 4 more goals in November, this was a playoff team. Like the margin was that thin, and I think he's the biggest X factor for why they didn't end up in a better spot earlier in the season. So that's why I think he's just a loser in this scenario right now. And especially in a contract year like that, most guys like Josh Norris in a contract year pop off and get 35 goals in 66 games. DeBrincat had 27 and didn't look like the best player on this team, which he could have been. And I think on top of all that, again, he had stretches where he was. In December, I remember around Christmas, he was the best player on this team, hands down. So I don't think I would say that with all the questions we needed answered around DeBrincat this season, none of them were answered. Like it was more just, okay, we'll see what direction they take. I can see either side, kind of thing. So I'm not sure how you feel about everything, but to me, he just the situation he finds himself in is a bit of a loser situation.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I was kind of considering him as my second one as well. Um, it's just, there were concerns, and a lot of people talked about when he was acquired. Well, what's he going to be away from Patrick Kane, and can he replicate kind of what he did in Chicago? And it was tough for him because it's entering a contract year, like you said. This, and I'm sure that distracted him too, right? You have that on your mind, but he was playing this year for money. He was playing for the big bucks and earning a $9 million+ contract, and at the end of the year, he probably came into the year thinking that, he was hoping people would be just on board with paying him $9 million+ at the end of the year because that's the season he had. And at the end of the year, nobody wants to pay him that much. And a lot of people are even saying they wouldn't pay him over like $7 million. And it's like, you have to think he's upset about it as well. And I do consider him a loser because they needed them to be better. Like he had a negative impact on the team based on what we were expecting. We expected a whole lot more than he provided, especially on the score sheet. I'm not as down on his season overall as most people, but I do think like the struggle to score at 5v5, it really did hurt the team. And again, they needed him to step up in Norris's absence, right? Like he was the prime candidate to step up in Josh Norris's absence and score goals, and he just didn't make up for it. Like he really did not make up for it. So DeBrincat's a good one. I think this ownership thing is a good point about it. That's actually why I was considering it more, was because he wanted to wait and see what happened with ownership, and now it's like, yeah, he's going to be past. They're going to be settled when he needs a contract. So it's like either he's going to get traded or he's going to have to settle for that 1-year deal unless he decides he's ready to commit, right? Because he said he was going to wait and come back after new ownership settled. That can't really happen now if everything works out as expected. So it's going to be a 1-year deal, or you're traded, or you just suck it up and you decide to stick with the Sens and sign long term. So yeah, I consider this whole situation and back to Reynolds and the ownership thing, just it relates to DeBrincat directly too, and that kind of makes him, it makes him more of a loser right now too, and he's really losing this summer.
Yeah, and honestly, the more this ownership kind of plays out and all these bids are public and all that, the less I blame him for waiting, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know if I don't know if I expected him to sign an extension right when he was traded, like last summer. Like, I remember Kevin Weeks tweeted out, like, keep an eye out for DeBrincat. They're working on an extension. I think that was like October 2nd, and we still haven't heard anything there, Kevin. So thank you. But I think around then it would have made sense. But then the team went for sale in November, or was like reported for sale. That's when that all started. So, the more that we hear about these bids, and we're talking about the Sparks bid and how odd it seems, I'm not blaming him for not wanting to sign on for 8 years of his life, right? Like this isn't just deciding, oh yeah, this is where I'm gonna play for next season. he's deciding where's my son gonna grow up. Like it's a big decision, and I think I think with how quickly a lot of these other young Sens players had signed extensions and so willingly, and how they embrace the culture and everything, it kind of spoiled us, I think, as fans a little bit, right? Like, yeah, it's a good culture, and look, if he decides he doesn't want to be here for whatever reason, it's completely fair to blame him as well. Like, I'm not saying anyone shouldn't. That's what sports are. You're supposed to hate other players who don't want to be a part of your team, but it's such a unique scenario that I don't blame him. Like, he's going to be the first deal with this ownership group if it all works out. Like, if let's say tomorrow he signs pen to paper and Dorion gets the okay to sign him to $60 million, then I won't use the Sparks group. Let's say Michael Andlauer buys the team and he's a nightmare. Then you're stuck here for 8 years, and you could have literally waited. You had time to wait. So I don't blame him. I'd be surprised if we hear anything DeBrincat wise before the draft, to be honest. I think that deadline's just going to come and go. But again, it can change I guess it's a month-ish now until the draft. So we'll see then. But yeah, to me, I think DeBrincat, I put him as my second one, but I'd say that whole situation, even though it's a great trade, he's still a good piece of this team. I think the entire DeBrincat situation in the last year has been a bit of a loser scenario.
They're just in limbo. The whole organization has been in limbo because of this ownership thing. And yeah, it's bad timing for DeBrincat because he got traded here and this wasn't really happening yet. And now all of a sudden it is, and it's been going on, and it got delayed. And he was probably thinking of that original timeline of July 1st, and he could kind of get everything sorted out and get an extension ready to go. Now that's been pushed back. So I don't know. Like, I'm interested to know where his mind is at now with it all, because he's kind of stuck in limbo with the rest of the team and the organization. And yeah, like you said, I mean, people overlook the personal aspect to this whole thing. Like, we were spoiled with the guys that got drafted, the core that got drafted by Ottawa, willing to sign long term, but DeBrincat came in from Chicago in a different situation that he really liked and that he didn't even want to leave in the first place. He was kind of forced out of. And now he's moved his whole family to Canada, where he's never, really set roots before. And it's like, you have to look at it from his perspective. And we're not saying he doesn't like Ottawa or anything. Nobody knows how he feels about Ottawa, but he's got to make a decision for his family. And I mean, if he doesn't want to be here, he doesn't want to be here if he can't commit to it. But yeah, I mean, who knows what the new owner is going to be like? There's no guarantee that the new owner is going to be this excellent owner who's going to make the Sens a championship team. Like, they really could go, terribly. Like, we really don't know. But yeah, I mean, it's up to him at the end of the day. We'll see. The timeline just really sucks for everybody involved. And for like Dorion too and stuff, it's hard because this is a huge contract. This, like, he might get paid more than anybody on the Sens right now. And that's just the reality. Is I know people don't want to pay him more than Tim or Brady, but to keep him, you might have to pay him 8.5 million or 9 million, and it would be tough to swallow. But like, that could be your biggest contract for years, maybe for the entire duration of this core's window. So
It's going to be the biggest deal in franchise history. If he signs an 8-year deal, that'll be the richest contract in Sens history. Like, it's not nothing. And I think, as much as we want to pinch pennies on him, it's like, and then on management, and they want to pinch pennies, it's a big deal. Like you said, like, I don't understand. If anyone out there, I don't know, it's been pretty quiet with the Brinket stuff lately, but I'd say that anyone saying it should be done already, and like, if the fact that it's taking so long means he doesn't want to be here, blah blah blah. Like, I don't buy any of that at all. Like, it's not a sleep on it kind of decision.
yeah, it's just like, it feels like right now the Sens aren't authorized to make any huge moves. Like, when we're talking about the biggest deal in franchise history, we're talking about, close to $10 million a year eaten up here by this one player. So a new owner coming in is going to have to authorize that. Like, you can't just randomly sign this player to this much money and then the new owner comes in and decides that they didn't want to do that move or something. It's more than just a Pierre Dorion thing here. He needs to have the authorization, and he needs to have, like, the ability to do this stuff. And I know it's been like, they acquired Chikrin and stuff, but I don't think they've been able to do a whole lot money wise with this ownership thing going on. Like, it's been fairly limited to what they can actually do. I don't think they've been able to sign DeBrincat for that reason in part too. But again, like, now they have to make a decision because the new owners might not be able to do anything about it anyways. Like, you can't be forced to trade DeBrincat because the new owners aren't settled yet. Like, that would be a worst case scenario. So we'll see what happens, but hopefully it can get all sorted out and sign them long term.
Just obviously, we're gonna wrap up here soon, but like, it's a good point. I think since the team has been for sale, I would say that they have brought on an extra $100,000 in salary. They shipped out Nikita Zaitsev at 4.5 and brought in Jacob Chikrin at 4.6. No extensions have really been signed. I think Zub was signed right after, maybe, or maybe right before. Not sure about the date there, but like, yeah. I mean, money in, money out. Kind of the old ways that we were used to for the Sens, right? And obviously, you're a cap team, you kind of have to do that. But they did have a little bit of wiggle room. I think they could have pulled off a Chikrin trade with Zaitsev still on the team, maybe move a little things, but there it wasn't an accident that it took that long kind of to do that and to get Zaitsev out. So yeah, money in and money out scenario right now. So I really don't know how that's going to work for free agency. I know we'll definitely do a potential target show in the next coming weeks here, like just who we like around the league. I know Victor Arvidsson is rumored to be a cap casualty in Los Angeles, so that would be a great, I think, addition to any top nine. Like we got lots of guys. So this has been episode 9 of the Everyday Sens podcast. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We got carried away once again, but that's what we plan to do. So we will see you guys on Friday.